What's a scary story from your childhood? Part 2? Please like and subscribe to support this channel. Years back I was staying at my mom's place for the night. She lives alone. Next morning I got a call from my grandma who lived next door saying there was a guy standing in front of my mom's door. I go open the door, and as soon as I do, this guy grabs the screen doorknob and starts to open it and come in. I immediately grabbed the doorknob and shut the door, and yelled at the guy to leave. My grandma had called the cops right after calling me, and they showed up a minute later. I remember opening the door as they were handcuffing him, and he faced me and just smiled. Turns out there was an assisted living facility a few blocks away that he had wandered from and was schizophrenic. I always look back on that and thank everything that I was in the house that day and not my mom. 3.5 years old, playing on a tricycle near our house. We lived in the middle of a row of townhouses with a bit of distance to where I was from the parking lot. Two very obese men got out of a white van walking towards me asking if I wanted to go to a Sunday school they ran with tons of toys and other kids. Confused by and trying to imagine what they were describing, I just kind of froze in place as they continued to walk very purposefully towards me. My older sister showed up, grabbed my arm, dragged me quickly back to our home, telling me, "We don't talk to strangers." A few years later, my mom showed us and some friends some pictures of police sketches of two familiar-looking men in the newspaper telling us the police were warning children to watch out for these two. I had a shooter threat at my high school. The dude had been expelled, IDKY, and some girl thought she saw him in the hallway. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal if he hadn't made a hit list a week or two before this. I was in my physics class. We all got under the tables, turned off the lights, and made sure the exit at the back of the classroom was unlocked. The principal hadn't verified anything, so at the moment we couldn't leave. I remember texting my mom, telling her what was happening. It was a false alarm, thank God. The girl got suspended for being wrong. Shortly after that I saw the little animated special on Netflix, If Anything Happens, I Love You. It all messed with my head in the weeks after. I remember a friend of mine was on his list. I hope she's okay. I haven't been in contact since graduation. I was about 17. We, friends and I, visited a house in North Queensland, Australia. The occupants suggested it we haunted. A friend claimed he saw an apparition. I was skeptical. One evening, we were sitting in the lounge room discussing our plans for the evening. A glass was sitting on the coffee table, it lifted and fell on the floor. It wasn't close to the edge, nobody touched it. Perhaps it was 15 centimeters from the edge of the table. I remember noting this because I was looking for a logical reason as to why this happened. It is the only thing in my life that convinced me that perhaps something supernatural was messing with us. When I was about 5 or 6, I went to a new place with my family to visit relatives. I wanted to play, so I went out and walked a bit far from home and got lost. It was the most terrifying thing for me. I don't remember the details quite well. I was crying walking aimlessly, but I'm grateful that the people were caring. They stopped and asked me where I lived. Someone fortunately recognized me and dropped me home. I've had hallucinations since as long as I can remember, but I guess as a dumb kid I never grasped that it was weird. Like, I knew what I was seeing wasn't real. I just thought that that's what people meant by your eyes playing a trick on you. I guess one of the worst was a recurring one I dubbed the Tree Man, because he's tall and lanky and bony, like a tree. I was creative. But anyhow, this thing looked like the actual Algonquian descriptions of a Wendigo. Not the pop culture thing with horns. I mean an inky black 8 to 10 foot tall shadowy figure thinner than paper with a mouth stretching from ear to ear and rows of sharp, pointed, gnarly teeth. I just kinda accepted his presence, and while he never tried to hurt me, he sure made me uncomfortable. He'd stand in the corner and watch me laying in bed. He once caught my foot out from under the blanket and began caressing it, making horrible eye contact, despite having skin pulled over the divots where his eyes should be, and just overall being creepy. I told my friend about it and they all said it must be a demon, but I've always been a skeptic, and so my dumb ass claimed the more likely explanation was that I just had really weird sleep paralysis where I just didn't get paralyzed. As a kid I hated staying at my auntie and uncle's house. I loved them, but I hated being in their house at night. It was an old villa and had been owned by two old ladies before my uncle and auntie bought it after the old ladies died. My auntie had also had a stillbirth while they were living there, and they had no other children. They used to put me to bed in the room that would have been their daughter's, and I would freak out. There was just a very uncomfortable feeling in that room. One memory I can still see vividly even today was one school holidays when my uncle was looking after me. I was sitting in the lounge watching TV and I heard someone walking down the hallway and looked up to see this white figure walk past the door. I thought it was my uncle and didn't think anything of it until he walked through the door on the other side of the room, so it couldn't have been him in the hallway. My auntie used to say that she thought the old ladies stole her baby. My family is overly superstitious. It's just something that my mom told me. I don't think she meant to scare me, but it still scares me now. I liked horror movies as a kid. My dad and I would watch gory Japanese horror films. I'd sleep on their bedroom floor, but I still lived horror films. My mom had a talk with me about the devil. She said he could be anyone. She told me if I'm ever scared, it's the devil, and all I need to do is say Jesus and the devil will run away. I grew up thinking the devil could even be next to me and be invisible. I'd randomly say Jesus in my room at night. I automatically still do it today, and the thought of it has haunted me since. I was 17, walking home around 12 a.m. with a good friend from a party. Both still a little high, more than a little drunk. It was a long walk, we're chatting, laughing, and suddenly hear a dog, close by off to our right, its sudden barks booming into the night. I could feel the bass, no shit. We look and see that it's behind a screened door of a house, just a silhouette with a bright light behind it. Startled, we gather ourselves, and continue walking and talking. Suddenly there's a loud tearing sound *RIIIIIIP. I look back for a split second and see a giant hole ripped in the screen door. My friend is like, "Oh shit son, run. Sick." And we take off across the street, charging into the driveway of some house. My friend was a little faster than me. I don't know how he did it, but he was suddenly on top of the garage, yelling out to me, "It's right there. Run." I swear I could feel the fucker's breath on my back. I angle my escape towards a tall chain link fence. I leap right over that shit like a high jumper, chest facing the night sky, barely clearing it, landing on my back. The dog is just a massive shadow on the other side of the fence. Breathing, growling, angry. It slowly stalks back off across the street. As it passes under the street lights, I see it clearly for the first time. It was one of those massive Beethoven rescue type dogs. You know what I'm saying? Cujo. My friend climbs down from the garage and we hop fences through the neighborhood until we reach my house. To this day, my friend and I, both older than 30 and still laughing about that night once in a while, have no idea how the fuck my friend made it on top of that garage so quickly. He swears he doesn't even remember climbing onto the roof. It was pure adrenaline. My siblings and I were at our cousin's house and we all decided to go upstairs and play with a Ouija board. We kept getting answers and eventually it said it was with us. At that moment our cousin pointed up in terror towards the room straight across the hall, which to our horror looked like a man standing in the dark looking at us. Everyone got up to run down the narrow staircase as fast as we could, trying to push past each other. The sheer terror I felt being the last one to come down the stairs was mortifying. To soothe myself and my young cousin, the other family told us it was just stuff stacked up in a weird way. There was nothing there, no stuffies, just a blank wall. While my parents were divorcing me and my sister had to stay at an abusive Indian daycare babysitter during the evenings. She used to favor my sister because she was the child who didn't have autism. She hated cripples. She used to hit me and hurt me with unconventional measures, slamming my head against the table or corners of the walls, hit me with belt buckles, the who fucking spiel. She never referred to me by my name, she called me names in Hindi, like Benchod. Her son was the worst, he used to get very physical. I eventually wore long sleeves so my mom wouldn't see my bruises and blame my dad more for the divorce. He once lured me into the garage to tie me up and tried to pull down my pants, but his sister stopped him. I was still beaten for not telling anyone, as keeping secrets is the sign of the devil. She used to tell me and my sister if I told my mom, people would take me away and I would never see my mom or dad again, and that they're divorcing because of me. Once my mom remarried and moved us out of the city, I can never easily trust anybody ever again. Yevon Fernandez, I wish you the most violent death on planet Earth. I was about 4 years old and my parents had recently divorced. It was Halloween night and I was laying in bed not quite asleep yet when I saw a shadow approach my bedroom window and open it. It was motherfucking Freddy Krueger. Before I could scream, his hand went over my mouth, he grabbed me and took me. I was kicking and fighting trying to get away, but I was just too little. He finally got me into his car and took off his mask. It was my dad. He abducted me that night and I didn't see my mom for a few days. I'm 37 now and Freddy Krueger scares the living shit out of me. Bit of a read, but thought it'd be a good I'd lived in the same room of the same house right up till I was nearly 20, rural area, not the best of neighborhoods, but not the worst either. Our house was in a tidy cul-de-sac down a windy road that devoted a reserve. Ever since I was a baby I used to have strange experiences. When I was learning to stand, my mum would catch me leaning on the side of my cot, always at night, reaching for something that wasn't there. My giggling would always wake my dad and her up. Until one night she had had enough, broke down in tears yelling at the room to leave me alone. Apparently I slept fine for the next few years. When I hit about 7 or 8, I used to get really bad sleep paralysis. I had a bunk bed, always slept in the top. I would have a few recurring hallucinations. The main one would be this dark figure that would stand next to my face, as this was where the ladder was to reach the top bunk, and just stare with dull red eyes. This would happen for a few minutes to half an hour before I could snap out of it. Another recurring one would be a series of footsteps that would pace the hallway back and forth. My room was in the center of the house with my bed sharing a wall with the hallway. The footsteps would usually be the hallucination that would lead onto the red-eyed figure. I eventually grew out of this too. In my mid-teens, 14 to 16, I would have this dream of someone watching me, and I would wake up to see this little girl at the foot of my bed. After I blinked a couple times she'd be gone. This happened a few times a week, but sometimes would be footsteps in the hallway again. Only this time instead of a tall figure pacing into my room, it would be large dark dog, but one thing that would remain the same was the dull red eyes. It would come closer to me until it was right at my head just the same, and then it would be gone. At this point, for whatever reason, I had started to sleepwalk. This usually would be me walking the length of the hallway to sit on the couch before waking up in the morning back in bed, or part way through on the couch itself. With one occurrence with my mum who was awake, where I apparently had a breakdown because she wouldn't let me pull the twist-top bathroom taps off. However, the one that stuck most was where I woke up to be facing myself in the hallway mirror. At the time it spooked me, but I thought nothing more of it. A few weeks later, my mum and I were watching Maleficent in the lounge, while my brother was finishing off the weeds in the garden. I went to the toilet, and when I came back my great auntie was standing in the entryway of the backyard door. When my mum asked what she was doing here, she just smiled. It was at this point my brother walked right on through her, and then she was gone. After that incident, I started to open up to my mum a bit more about what had been going on, the sleepwalking, the sleep paralysis, and the hallucinations. What creeped me out the most though was that when I told her about the girl I used to see, she asked me to go into full detail about what she looked like, and sure enough it apparently matched the same girl she and her brother used to see when she was my age. Even creepier was the same sleepwalking pattern and the mirror incident. Since then I've always been open to her about anything slightly odd that has happened in my life, where things feel slightly off. Now that I'm in my 20s I haven't had many more incidents. What definitely has helped has been moving out of that house. However, before moving out, I used to do the night shift at a restaurant a couple kilometers up the road, seeing as it was reasonably close, and I'd always start in the mid-afternoon. I'd just longboard to work and back. It kept me fit, and overall didn't bother me really. Guaranteed every time I'd skate past the David in the reserve I'd always get a negative feeling, like someone was watching me. I thought I saw something one night coming home, which was the same pair of dull red eyes staring from part way up a tree. At the time it had scared the hell out of me, but looking back, I'm pretty sure it was just eyeshine of a possum or cat that I had mistaken for something worse, as I did always skate with a head torch to prevent any accidents. After that I started to get counseling to help me figure how I could stop myself from panicking about these things, and eventually work through it all to the point where it wouldn't happen or it wouldn't worry me. Now that I'm in a new house with my partner I haven't really had any more things happen. When we first moved in I thought I'd heard knocking on the toilet door after I came home from a late night at work, only to remember being the only one home as she hadn't finished her prior lease yet. While my flatmate and I have both sworn to have seen shadow figures in the lounge. I more or less chalk that all up to overtiredness from the late nights. There hasn't been any more incidents in nearly a year now, so I think it's safe to say that I've either grown out of it, or worked through whatever had been going on mentally with me. One of the subdivisions I lived in as a young child backed up to a cotton field. When we were out walking one day, my mother stopped to talk to the elderly couple who lived right by the field. I don't remember any of the details, but I remember them telling us about a child who had died while playing in the cotton field years before. Naturally, this made 4-year-old me a little uneasy. Other than that, the scary stories from my childhood were all in the classic Alvin Schwartz books. I was 16, just moved to a major city from a small town where no one locked their doors. There was a market event downtown with live music in shops and tents. I was with my family but wandered off alone to walk near the river. I was the only one walking the path, right next to a large parking lot. A white truck pulls up and a guy calls out to me, "Hey, my friend thinks you're cute, can we get your number?" I tell them I'm 16, trying to deter them, but they persist. I tell them no thanks, and then weirdly, he asked me if I was registered to vote. Obviously, I just told them I was 16, so, a no? But they were so persistent that I finally gave in and approached them to fill out the registration, just so they'd finally leave me alone after. As soon as I got near the car, both dudes got out and cornered me in between their car and the car next to them. I immediately felt like I was in danger. They were trying to get me to write down my info on the form and kept saying all they needed was my address. I lied and told them I didn't know it since I had just moved. I thought on my feet and took out my phone, which was on 1% battery, and called my mom. She didn't really understand what I was saying, and I was basically pretending to have a conversation with her while she was saying, "What, where are you?" I described the car they were driving and what they looked like and told her what they were asking me, and then my phone died in the middle of the call. I pretended that I was still talking to her. They said again all they wanted was my address and they'd leave me alone, and asked if the person on the phone knew. I lied and said it was actually my aunt and she didn't know. I told them if they gave me their number, I would text my address when I got home. They grabbed my arm and wrote it down on my skin and then let me go. I bolted. I was crying hysterically after the encounter and told my mom everything. She called the police and the cop entered the number into their database and it came up belonging to a registered sex offender. I feel so unbelievably lucky that I was able to think on my feet and they decided to let me go. TLDR, 2 guys cornered me, tried to get my address, it was incredibly sketchy, thought on my feet and was able to get away. Ended up giving me their number before leaving. Turns out one of them was a sex offender. Catholic upbringing here. There was a priest who taught at our school and it was obvious he hated girls. He was always very nasty to us and I detested him. In later years it emerged that he'd been abusing the boys in the school. I cried and cried when I learned this. We always thought the boys were lucky because he was nice to them. It broke my heart to think of some of the lovely young lads he ruined and of how close an escape we girls had. I'm in my 60s now and I've never been able to shake it off. I was about 10 years old. I came home from school and immediately took off my shoes and backpack and started playing video games. In the house I grew up in, my parents' bedroom was right above the living room, so when I heard 4 distinct footsteps above me I thought nothing of it because I was so used to hearing my parents walking around. Then I remembered I was home alone. My eyes got wide, I froze, and I wondered what I should do. I decided to go to the kitchen and grab the biggest knife I could find and go up there. I cautiously walk upstairs into my parents' bedroom, bathroom, and closet, and there was nothing there. Me, my sister, and my mom had some pretty weird experiences in this house. Dark figures and feeling like you were being watched was normal. My mom even saw a dark figure standing over her and watching her while she was sleeping. But that was my scariest experience. Was about 13 at the time, babysitting 3 crazy-ass kids in the middle of a mini snowstorm. One of them went inside for a while and I was left with the 2 I'll call M and V. We were building a snow fort in the middle of the small concrete circle with some dead trees, fairly tall fort, like you can't see the other side of it. I was sitting on the top of it when a rusty van pulls up and slows down as it sees us. I keep watching and see it pull into a layer of underbrush where it can see us but we can't see it. Creeped out, I slide down the fort and continue watching the kids. I hear a car start driving and my mind instantly goes to the worst, so I tell the kids to get behind the fort, telling them I found a cool ice chunk. We like digging holes and looking for ice or pennies or whatever. I watch in horror as the van pulls around the side of the fort and the driver, who I now can tell is an old homeless-looking man, looks as though he's getting ready to exit the van. I rush to get the kids to the other side of the fort in hopes the man will go away. He puts the van in reverse and starts pulling around the fort. Trying to think fast, I pull the kids to our street fort, a smaller fort that's in front of a neighbor's house. I tell the kids to duck, which they do, thinking it's a funny game and soon maybe a friend will jump out and scare them. The van proceeds to do a double take around the neighborhood and eventually stop in front of a neighbor's house. After what feels like forever, it leaves. This took place last year. Snow season is coming up again, and God am I scared. I used to dream a repeatable nightmare that would repeat as I grew up. It was about me in a car in the night with some two cartoonish characters with blood dripping from their teeth in the back with me. I couldn't see the driver. They used to say some weird stuff to me, then end it with, "Why don't we be friends?" Then bite me in the neck, then I struggled, then pass out. First time they bit me, second time I jumped out of the car and hid in a bush. They found me. Third time I ran and never looked back. They were chasing me in the car yelling. I still dream of that till this day, but rarely. It's almost like a yearly reminder. This may sound fake, but I see what you believe. This is marked on my heart. I was 8 at the time and I lived in Tinker Air Force Base just south of Oklahoma City. On May 3, 1999, an EF-5 tore through Oklahoma and just barely missed our house. I can still remember the sound of shingles being ripped off and the house creaking from the 300+ mph winds. When they say tornadoes sound like trains, well, that was no train. That sounded like a jet in Afterburner. I still get PTSD from that night. Thankfully we were all safe and alive. I was once visiting relatives at my aunt's house, whom lives in Mexico City. Anyhow, at the end of the 4-story house, I was hiding in what is my cousin's room. As kids at the time we were playing hide and seek. So I hid underneath my cousin's bed in her room. However, for some reason as a few seconds went by I heard what sounded like someone was jumping on the bed. It made a squeaking noise. I had a clear view underneath the bed, so no one could have been on the bed as there's only 2 sides to get onto the bed, as it was placed in front of a dresser and in the corner of the bedroom next to a wall. No ped TF outta there. Quick overall, her house is really creepy. There's more experiences within that house, but this one intrigues me since I like to say I've played hide and seek with a ghost. When I was in college I walked a friend of mine home to her apartment complex, which was about a 25-minute walk from campus. It was a dilapidated old building with a courtyard that had a bunch of stone walls and a really confusing layout, almost like a maze. After I walked her to the front door I turned to leave and realized, to my annoyance, that I didn't know my way out and all of the corridors looked alike. As I walked around trying to find my way out I noticed just how abandoned the place looked. It seemed like a lot of the apartments were just empty and no one was really around. Some of the lights didn't work and the whole place just had a run-down vibe. I might have been imagining things, but I thought I heard hurried footsteps behind me. They stopped abruptly whenever I stopped and turned my head. No one. Okay. Rounded another corner. More weird shuffling footsteps that just stopped. The gait seemed uneven, almost like one foot was dragging behind the other. I rounded a corner and there in big white letters, someone had scrawled, "Are you alone?" in weird blocky letters. Footsteps came back, but this time it wasn't a shuffling walk. Whoever it was, they were running and I could hear the pounding of their feet on the pavement as they were about to turn the corner. Fight or flight took over and I turned and fucking booked it just as I heard the footsteps round the corner. I sprinted through corridor after corridor, sometimes into pitch black thanks to those broken fucking lights. Heard some fucking weird heavy breathing noises and weird gibbering accompanying the footsteps. After what seemed like forever, I rounded a corner and saw the front entrance, ran through it immediately and ran for about 10 minutes straight until I was nearly to campus. I was really out of shape at the time and didn't think I had it in me. I guess adrenaline is a hell of a drug. The next morning I told my friend about what happened and she brushed it off, saying that it was probably one of the remaining tenants playing a joke. Apparently the owner of the building wasn't renewing anyone's leases and the population of the complex dwindled to just a handful of people. No idea who would play such a prank. I think I narrowly avoided a mugging or worse that night. Friend moved out at the end of the semester and I think the building got demolished a year or so later. Good riddance. Happened like a year ago, but still. For reference, I was a 13-year-old male at the time, and lived in a relatively well-off neighborhood. So, in the summer of 2020, my dad wanted my brother and I to walk 5,000 steps every day, and get outside. The day before this story, my brother and I had a bit of an argument, so I decided to go alone. I'm about a third of the way around the block on lap 2/2, when I noticed this old guy walking behind me. My block is a horseshoe, with an inner circle. Most of the time, I, and most people follow the path of the horseshoe, so, to test whether or not the guy was intentionally following me, I walked across the street and skipped the nice scenic route. I, being resourceful, pulled out my phone to look at some texts, but in reality I was using my front-facing camera to see if he was still following me, because slightly turning my head and using peripheral vision may have aroused suspicion for him, causing a scary chase or battle to ensue. He was still following me. I doubt it was because he wanted to take the short way from the heat, since it was a nice 0 wind, 70 Fahrenheit day. I started to pick up the pace, and using my phone again, I noticed the man had also started to walk significantly faster. At this point I was fucking terrified, so I speedwalked home in an inconspicuous chase. I ran up the driveway, and closed the then open garage door as fast as I could. When I went into the entryway facing the street to talk with my dad and watch to see if the man passed, I noticed that after a few minutes the man definitely did not walk by, as he was probably about 30 yards behind me, and thus would not have had time to have gone past before I got inside. I'm not sure if something bad could have happened due to where I live, but it's still pretty scary thinking of the possibilities. Around 20 years ago when I was 10 or 11 I was gifted these walkie-talkies that were supposed to have a pretty good range of like 100 feet, which is decent for toy walkies. I immediately wanted to play with them and see if they worked, so I gave one to my little sister and told her to go downstairs and I would call for her on the walkie to see if it worked a floor away. My sister ran downstairs and after a few seconds I called her name. "Katie? Katie, can you hear me?" A man's voice answered me, saying, "Not Katie." I paused for a second, but then I remembered we had this toy that was a voice changer, and I thought my sister was trying to prank me. So I spoke into the walkie again, not believing what I was hearing. "Katie, are you joking? Are you trying to mess with me?" "This isn't Katie," the man's voice said again. I can so clearly remember feeling my stomach drop as I realized that most definitely was not my sister, and a chill went over my whole body. I dropped the walkie and screamed for my mom. She had me turn them off immediately. The scariest part was that whoever it was had to be within 100 feet of us. I have no idea who it was. It wasn't any of our neighbors. We were friends with everyone on our street. I remember looking out my bedroom window into the woods and feeling like someone was watching me.